Darius Wade was 41 years old when his ex-wife called to demand her share of a life she had abandoned. For 16 years, Yvette had watched him work. Long hours, modest paychecks, an unfinished investment property she considered an embarrassment. She filed for divorce, calling it a dead-end life and a lack of ambition. She took the row house, the liquid assets, and what she was certain was the better deal. What she left behind was a quiet man with a structural engineer's mind, an unfinished property, and 18 months he intended to use carefully. She didn't know about the 3 developments. She didn't know about the 4th under contract. She didn't know about the 52-foot yacht. But a photo found its way to her. And so she called. Calm, warm, rehearsed. And then she said the word that changed everything. Share. Like it already belonged to her. What Darius did next, she never saw coming. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The sun was going down slow over Charleston Harbor. Darius Wade watched it from the deck of the quiet tide. 52 feet of white fiberglass and teak wood, anchored a quarter-mile from shore where the water turned the color of an old copper penny. The sky above it was doing something remarkable. Deep orange bleeding into purple, the kind of sky that didn't ask permission and didn't apologize for how much space it took up. He respected that. He held his bourbon glass loosely, the way a man holds something he's earned. The ice had melted down to 2 small chips. The liquor was the good kind. Not performed, not for anyone's benefit, but his own. He took a slow sip and let the warmth settle in his chest, like a period at the end of a long sentence. No phone calls, no emails, no noise, but the water moving against the hull in that steady, patient rhythm that reminded him of breathing. He was 41 years old. He had never been more at peace in his life. He almost didn't recognize the feeling at first. Peace had not been the dominant weather of the last several years. He thought about that sometimes, not with bitterness, but the way an engineer thinks about a stress fracture he's already repaired. You study it, so you understand it. You don't stand there wishing the crack had never happened. 16 years of marriage to Yvette. 16 years in a Baltimore row house with a narrow kitchen and a back porch that needed new boards every spring, and a neighborhood that was decent, but not the kind of decent Yvette wanted people to see. He had loved that house. He had loved the work of it, the slow, deliberate project of turning something modest into something solid. Yvette had loved what she imagined the house could become. Then she stopped believing it would. He couldn't pinpoint the exact year things shifted in her. Maybe there wasn't one year. Maybe it was gradual, the way a foundation settles, invisible until the cracks appear in the walls. What he knew for certain was that somewhere in the middle of their marriage, Yvette began measuring their life against other people's lives, and their life kept coming up short in her accounting. She wanted European vacations. He was putting money into the investment property on Guilford Avenue. She wanted dinner parties in a zip code that meant something. He was logging 12-hour days on job sites, building a resume in his head and a plan on paper that she never asked to see. She wanted a husband whose success was something you could point to immediately. A title, a car, a lifestyle that announced itself when you walked into a room. Darius built things that took time to stand up straight. She had never really understood that about him. Or maybe she had understood it and decided she didn't have the patience for it. By the end, her contempt was quiet, but total. Not loud. Yvette was never loud. She had a way of making you feel the distance between you without raising her voice. A particular skill, he had come to understand, that had very little to do with love. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday. Irreconcilable differences. That was what she called it. A legal phrase that covered a lot of ground without describing any of it accurately. What she meant was simpler. She had looked at the life they were building and decided the return wasn't worth the wait. No children. That was the one mercy in all of it. The one place where the absence of something turned out to be a gift. The settlement was clean. He had let it be clean on purpose. She took the row house, the joint savings, the furniture she'd picked out, and the appliances she'd upgraded twice, and the life she'd decided was worth more to her than he was. He took his retirement accounts, his truck, and the investment property on Guilford Avenue. 3 units, half renovated, sitting on a block that was 6 months away from turning. Yvette's attorney had barely argued for it. As far as they were concerned, Darius had taken the consolation prize. That was fine. He had always been comfortable being underestimated. 18 months after the divorce was finalized, he and Thomas had 3 properties operating in the Mid-Atlantic corridor. Mixed use. Retail on the ground floor, residential above. Each one chosen with the same structural logic Darius had applied to every project in his engineering career. Identify the load-bearing points, build them right, and let the rest follow. A 4th property was under contract in Richmond. His net worth had crossed 7 figures in October, and the number was still climbing. He lived in a rented apartment, drove the same truck, kept no profile worth mentioning. The quiet tide was the one visible thing, the one place he had spent money in a way that showed, and even that, he had anchored a 1/4 mile from shore. He reached for the bottle on the small teak table beside him, poured 2 fingers more, watched the last sliver of sun disappear beneath the waterline, like it had somewhere better to be. The harbor spread out before him, wide and dark and full of open water in every direction. He hadn't started yet. The office Darius and Thomas kept in Fells Point was a 2nd-floor walk-up above a tile supplier, reached by a narrow staircase that creaked on the 4th step, no matter how carefully you placed your foot. The space itself was clean but unimpressive. 2 desks, a drafting table covered in site plans, a coffee maker that Thomas treated with the seriousness most men reserved for expensive equipment. The window overlooked a cobblestone alley. In the mornings, the light came through at a low angle and lit up the dust motes above the drafting table like something almost beautiful. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late March, cold still, but with the first real suggestion of spring underneath it, that particular smell in the air, damp and green and impatient. Darius was at his desk with the Richmond contract open in front of him, a yellow legal pad beside it with 3 columns of handwritten notes. Thomas sat across the drafting table with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, marking a site plan with a red pen, and arguing with himself quietly in a mixture of English and Spanish. "This setback is wrong," Thomas said, not looking up. "I've been looking at it for 20 minutes, and it's wrong." "It's not wrong," Darius said. He did not look up either. "It's wrong, Darius. Check the amended survey. The one dated February." A pause. The sound of papers being shuffled with some violence. Then a shorter pause. "Okay," Thomas said. "It's not wrong. I'm going to need more coffee before we do the utility section. There's half a pot." The room settled back into its working quiet. Outside, a delivery truck idled in the alley. Somewhere below them, someone dropped a crate of tile. Darius's phone buzzed against the desk. He glanced at the screen. He looked at it for just a moment, 1 beat longer than a stranger's call would have required. Then he stood, picked it up, and walked out of the office without a word. The staircase landing was cold and smelled like concrete. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Darius." Her voice came through warm and practiced. "Hey, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "I'm at the office," he said. "What's going on, Yvette?" I know. I won't keep you long." A small, familiar laugh, the one she used when she wanted to seem casual about something she wasn't casual about at all. "I've been thinking about you, actually. Saw a photo someone posted from a marina event. Looked like you and Thomas, and I read that piece in the Chesapeake Business Review." A brief pause. Darius, you bought a yacht. He said nothing. I want you to know I think that's incredible. I really do. I always knew you had it in you. Her voice carried something that was supposed to sound like pride. I always believed in you. I hope you know that. He was quiet another moment. The landing was very still. Down in the alley, the delivery truck finally pulled away. Thank you, he said. Even. Mild. He gave her nothing. I've actually been wanting to reach out for a little while now, she continued. The warmth in her voice shifted just slightly, not disappearing, but making room for something more purposeful underneath it. I've been consulting with someone about the settlement, about how things were divided, and I really think it would be worth it for us to sit down and just talk. Like adults, you know? Darius looked at the wall in front of him. Plain white drywall with a thin crack running up from the baseboard. He studied it the way he studied everything, without rushing, without reaction. Talk about what exactly? He said. The pause that followed was small. 3 seconds, maybe 4. But he heard everything inside it. He heard the rehearsal. He heard the moment she chose which version of herself to send forward. Then she said it, plainly, without apology, without softening it into something easier to hand to a person. My share, Darius. I think it's time we talked about my share. The word arrived like something she'd already decided was hers. Not what's fair. Not what I feel I'm owed. Not even what I deserve, which at least would have carried an argument inside it. Share. Present tense. Possessive. Calm in the way that only certainty can be calm. As though she had simply been sitting at a window all this time, watching his life accumulate on the other side of the glass, waiting with perfect patience for someone to open the door and let her portion in. I'll think about it, he said. He ended the call. He did not go back upstairs. He walked down to the garage beneath the building, got into his truck, and sat with the engine off and the phone face down on the passenger seat. 11 minutes. He did not call anyone. He did not check his phone. He sat in the gray concrete quiet and turned that word over in his mind the way you turn a stone over to see what's living underneath it. Share. After 11 minutes, he picked up his phone. He called Angela Price. Angela Price's office was on the 4th floor of a building on St. Paul Street, 12 minutes from the courthouse. The waiting room had 2 chairs and a potted plant that looked like it had survived through sheer stubbornness. The receptionist showed Darius in at 8:55, 5 minutes before his appointment. Angela was already at her desk. She was a compact woman with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses she kept at the end of her nose when she was looking at documents and pushed entirely off when she was looking at a person. She pushed them off when Darius sat down. That meant he had her full attention, which was the only kind she gave. Tell me everything she said, Angela said. Word for word, as close as you can get. He did. He went through the entire call without editorializing. The warm opening, the congratulations, the mention of the business profile, and then the word itself. Share. He said it the same way Yvette had said it. Flat, certain. Like a hand extended for something already decided. Angela listened without interrupting. She did not write anything down while he spoke. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, then picked up a pen. She's going to argue the investment property, Angela said. The one you kept in the settlement. I figured. She'll claim it was a marital asset, and that its appreciation since the divorce should be subject to equitable distribution. There's a legal theory for it. It's aggressive, and it's mostly without merit given the language in your settlement agreement. But it's not nothing. She tapped the pen once against her legal pad. It's designed to be expensive to fight. The goal is to make defending yourself cost more than settling. Darius looked at her steadily. So we don't settle? No, Angela said. We don't settle. She wrote something at the top of the pad. What I need from you is every financial document from the marriage. Tax returns, bank statements, investment accounts, the property records, renovation receipts, everything you have. Bring me the boxes, and I'll have my paralegal go through them." She looked up. "All of it, Darius. Even the things that feel irrelevant." He told her he'd get started that evening. The storage unit was in Hampton, a 10-minute drive from the apartment. He got there just after 7, when the last of the daylight was going gray and thin behind the rooftops. The unit was a 10 by 10 space he hadn't opened in almost 2 years. It smelled like cardboard and old dust, and the particular closed-in stillness of a place that holds the things a person needs to keep, but not to see. He carried 4 boxes back to the truck and drove to the apartment. He spread everything across the kitchen table and started sorting. Bank statements in one pile, tax returns in another, renovation receipts, utility records, the property paperwork for the row house. He worked methodically, the way he always worked, without hurrying, without skipping. He was 2 hours in when he found the folder. It had been tucked inside a larger accordion file, sandwiched between a set of water heater warranty documents and a stack of old insurance policies. The folder was plain manila, no label on the tab. He almost set it aside. Instead, he opened it. Inside was a printed email chain, 11 pages, single-sided. He read the first page standing at the table. Then he sat down. The emails were dated 14 months before Yvette filed for divorce. They were between Yvette and a man named Perry Walsh. The early messages were careful, professional in surface language, but warm underneath in a way that had nothing to do with business. By the 3rd page, the warmth had given up pretending, but it was pages 6 through 11 that stopped his breathing. Perry Walsh, writing in the tone of a man who had done this kind of thing before, was walking Yvette through a process. Specific amounts, specific timing, small transfers, never more than $400 at a time, moved from their joint savings account into a private account in Yvette's name alone. He laid out the intervals carefully, noting which amounts would stay below the threshold that triggered alerts. He explained that executed consistently over 8 months, the total would be significant without any single transfer appearing significant. The total, calculated in Perry's own handwriting in the margin of the final page, was $34,000. Darius sat very still for a moment. He thought about the conversation at the mediator's table 3 years ago, the savings account balance that had struck him as thin. He'd mentioned it, quietly, and Yvette had sighed with the patience of someone explaining something obvious. The renovations, Darius. The kitchen alone was almost $15,000. He had believed her. He got up. He retrieved his phone from the counter and photographed every page of the email chain. Then he went through the bank statements until he found the account period in question and photographed those too. 12 months of statements. The small withdrawals visible once you knew what you were looking for. Regular as a pulse. He called Angela. She answered on the 2nd ring. He described what he had found, reading her the amounts and dates without commentary. She asked him to send the photographs immediately and told him not to discuss it with anyone else until they spoke again in the morning. He said he understood. Then he got his keys and drove to his mother's house. Claudette Wade lived in the same house in Waverly she had lived in for 31 years. The porch light was on when Darius pulled up, which meant she had heard his truck or sensed him coming. With Claudette, it was hard to know which. She opened the door before he reached the steps. She looked at his face. She didn't say anything yet. She just stepped aside to let him in. They sat at the kitchen table the way they had always sat through hard things, across from each other, the overhead light warm and low, a glass of water in front of him that she had poured without asking. He told her everything, the call from Yvette, the meeting with Angela, the folder, the 11 pages, the $34,000 moved in slow, careful increments out of a life he had been faithfully building while someone else quietly drained it. He told it straight through without stopping. When he finished, the house was very quiet. Claudette sat with her hands folded on the table. She looked at him for a long moment, the way she had always looked at him when she was making sure he was still himself underneath whatever the world had just handed him. Then she said, "Baby, don't be angry. Be ready." Darius looked at his mother. He nodded once. The next morning, Darius was back on St. Eater's, Paul Street, at 8:45. He set his phone on Angela's desk, and she went through every photograph without speaking. She moved through the email chain first, page by page, reading slowly. Then the bank statements. She had her glasses on the whole time, which meant she was still in the documents, still working. When she finally looked up and pushed the glasses off, he straightened slightly in his chair. He knew exactly what he was doing, she said. These intervals are deliberate. The amounts are deliberate. She set the phone down. This isn't a man who gave your wife casual advice. This is someone who understood compliance thresholds and used that understanding to help her take money from a joint marital account over an extended period of time. She paused. While they were involved. Before she filed, Darius said, 14 months before. Angela picked up her pen. That matters. That matters a great deal. She told him her plan. She would file a formal response to Yvette's equitable distribution claim, a clean, direct rebuttal anchored in the settlement language Yvette's own attorney had drafted. But she would file something else at the same time, a discovery request, full financial records, 5 years back. Every account, every transfer, every statement attached to Yvette's name. Discovery works both ways, Angela said. Not as a joke, just as a fact. Delivered the way she delivered all facts, flat and precise, with no need to underline it. Darius nodded. How long before they have to respond? 30 days, possibly 45 if they push. She wrote something on her pad. They'll push, but they still have to respond. He thanked her and left. He called Yvette that afternoon. He kept his voice easy and even. He told her he had thought about what she said. He thought it might be useful to meet in person before the attorneys made everything complicated. He suggested a restaurant, a quiet place in Federal Hill, neutral ground, nothing that belonged to either of them. She agreed without hesitation, which told him she had been waiting for the call. They settled on Thursday at 12:30. He arrived 3 minutes early. The restaurant was a corner spot with exposed brick walls and small square tables that kept conversations private by keeping them close. He gave the host his name. He was shown to a table near the window and sat with his back to the wall, facing the door. Yvette came in at 12:34. Perry Walsh came in behind her. Darius had not been told Perry was coming. He was almost certain Yvette had not mentioned it during their call, because if she had, he would have remembered it, and he remembered everything about that conversation. This was a decision made after the fact, a choice to bring back up into a room she had agreed to enter alone. He registered it. He did not react to it. Perry Walsh was tall, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of easy confidence that came from a long habit of being the most expensively dressed man in a room. His suit was charcoal gray and fitted well. He wore a watch that was not subtle. He moved like a man who was accustomed to walking into places and having them rearrange slightly around him. Darius stood and shook both their hands. He waited for them to sit. Then he sat. He ordered water. Perry did most of the talking. He framed it carefully. Never threatening, never direct. But the shape of what he was saying was clear enough. Legal proceedings were costly. They moved slowly. The emotional toll on everyone involved was real. He mentioned attorney's fees twice in the first 10 minutes, each time with a small, sympathetic tilt of his head, as if he were genuinely concerned about Darius's exposure. Yvette nodded at the right moments. She was dressed simply, her hands folded on the table. She spoke about wanting resolution, about not wanting things to become adversarial. She said the word fair 3 times. Each time, she said it like it was something she personally invented. Darius watched Perry. He watched the way Perry leaned back in his chair with his arms stretched along the back of Yvette's seat. He watched the way Perry's eyes moved around the room at intervals, checking who was there, checking who might be watching. He watched the way Perry smiled, that slight, practiced smile of a man who believed he was the smartest person at the table and had decided not to fully hide it. Darius ate nothing. He drank his water. He asked 2 short questions and let the answers run long, because people who believe they are winning will always talk more than they need to. When the check came, Perry reached for it without hesitation. A performance. Darius let him have it. He folded his napkin and set it on the table. He stood, and both of them looked up at him. "I want you both to know," Darius said, "that I take this seriously." He let a half-second pass. "I take everything seriously." Perry smiled. The smile said, "Sure you do." Yvette reached over and touched Perry's arm. Darius buttoned his jacket, nodded once, and walked out. In the parking lot, he unlocked his truck, got in, and took out his phone. He opened his thread with Thomas and typed 1 word. Confirmed. The call came on a Tuesday. Angela did not use many words. She said the discovery documents had arrived, that her paralegal had already been through them, and that Darius should come in. That was all. When Angela Price called you in person instead of sending an email, it meant something worth hearing face to face. He was at her office by 2 o'clock. The paralegal, a quiet woman named Denise, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and moved through paper the way a surgeon moved through a procedure, had already organized everything into labeled folders, 3 of them, spread across the small conference table beside Angela's desk, color-coded tabs, nothing out of place. Angela sat across from Darius and opened the first folder. "The account Perry helped her establish during the marriage," she said, setting a bank document in front of him. "You assumed it was closed after the divorce." Darius looked at the paper. It wasn't. It was not. Angela set a second document beside the first. "It was merged. Approximately 6 weeks after your divorce was finalized, the balance, which had grown by then, was folded into a joint account, held jointly with Perry Walsh." Darius looked at both documents side by side. He did not speak. "That alone is instructive," Angela said. "But it becomes considerably more instructive when you look at the dates." She slid a 3rd page across the table. It was a timeline her paralegal had built, clean, chronological, each entry sourced to a specific document. Darius read it from the top. "The account Perry helped Yvette create, the one fed by 14 months of small, quiet transfers from the joint savings, had been opened while Perry Walsh was still formally listed as her financial advisor. The engagement letter between Yvette and Perry's firm was dated almost 2 years before she filed for divorce. The personal emails Darius had found in the boxes, the ones that were already intimate in tone, were dated inside that advisory window. The picture was plain. Perry Walsh had used his professional role, a role that came with legal obligations to act in his client's interest, and only his client's interest, to help that same client take money from a marital account, redirect it into a private account, and do all of it while beginning a personal relationship with her. That was not bad judgment. That was not a gray area. That was a breach of his fiduciary duty, documented across multiple records, with timestamps that left no room for a different interpretation. "How serious is the licensing exposure?" Darius asked. "Significant," Angela said, "particularly because he is not a first-time offender." She opened the 2nd folder. Tomas had surfaced it through a contact in the Mid-Atlantic investor community, a man who had crossed paths with Perry Walsh professionally about 3 years back and had not forgotten the experience. A regulatory complaint had been filed against Perry 2 years earlier by a different client. The details were different, but the shape was the same. Advisory misconduct, a conflict of interest, a settlement reached quietly before it could become public. Perry's license had not been suspended at the time. The complaint had been resolved without formal disciplinary action, which meant it had not stopped him. It had just become a template. Tomas had put the documentation together himself. A printed copy of the public regulatory filing, the settlement notice, and a one-paragraph note in Tomas's handwriting at the top that said simply, "Second time around, it's different." T. Darius had read it in his truck outside Tomas's office before driving straight to Angela. Now, Angela held the folder and said, "I'm preparing a formal complaint to the licensing board. Everything we have, the timeline, the asset transfers, the prior complaint, the fiduciary breach, structured as a complete submission. When do you file it?" She set the folder down and looked at him directly. "When it does, the most damage." Darius nodded. He understood. The complaint was not a first move. It was a closing move, held in reserve until Yvette's legal claim had fully committed itself, until Perry had no soft landing to retreat to, until the most consequential moment to release it arrived on its own. He gathered his copy of the documents and tapped the edges against the table to straighten them. "Does her attorney know yet what's in the discovery?" he asked. "Her attorney knows what we requested," Angela said. "They do not yet know what we found in what they sent us. That's a distinction I intend to preserve for as long as possible." Darius stood and buttoned his jacket. "Good," he said. He called Tomas from the parking garage. Tomas picked up on the second ring. "Well?" "Angela's got everything. The timeline, the prior complaint, all of it. So we move?" Darius walked to his truck. He stood beside it for a moment, keys in hand, looking at nothing in particular. "Not yet," he said. "We let her keep thinking she's winning." The call from Claudette came on a Tuesday evening, a week after the discovery documents had arrived. Darius was still at his desk when his phone lit up. His mother did not call in the evenings unless she had something specific to say. She was not a woman who called just to talk. "She reached out to me," Claudette said. No preamble. "Yvette called me this afternoon." Darius set down his pen. "I'll come tonight." Claudette lived in the same house she had lived in for 26 years. A narrow two-story in northwest Baltimore with a covered porch and a kitchen that always smelled like something warm, even when nothing was on the stove. Darius had grown up inside these walls. He knew every creak in the floorboards, every spot where the porch light flickered in the cold. He arrived at 7. Claudette was already at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea she had poured before he knocked. She was 67 and looked like someone who had earned every year of it with intention. Her hair was silver at the temples, her hands steady, her eyes the kind of calm that only came from having seen enough not to be rattled by much anymore. She waited until he sat down and wrapped his hands around the cup before she started. "She called around 2, Claudette said. "Very polite at first. You know how she gets, all smooth and composed, like she's running a meeting." Darius nodded. He knew exactly how she got. "She said you were being vindictive, that this whole legal process was you punishing her for leaving instead of just doing what was right." Claudette's voice carried no particular heat. She was reporting, not editorializing. "She said she contributed to your foundation, that she stood by you during the years when you had nothing yet, and that she deserves to share in what came after." "What did you say?" "I said I would pass it along." Claudette lifted her cup and took a slow sip. "Which is exactly what I am doing." Darius almost smiled. "But that's not why I called you tonight," she said. She set the cup down and looked at him squarely. "She wasn't calling me because she's confident, Darius. I've talked to confident people. Confident people don't call their ex-husband's mother and try to make a case." She folded her hands on the table. "She was calling because something is pressing on her and she needed the pressure to go somewhere." "How do you know?" "Because she talked too much." Claudette tilted her head slightly. "She let something slip. I don't think she meant to." She was moving fast through her points, and she said that she and Perry had been planning to put the settlement toward a business of their own, a real estate venture, and that it was, I'm going to use her exact words, because I wrote them down after I hung up. She reached toward the notepad she kept beside the fruit bowl, the one she had used for grocery lists and school notes for 30 years. She had written 4 words on the top line in her neat teacher's cursive. She slid the pad across to Darius, counting on this quickly. She said they were counting on this being resolved quickly, Claudette said. That things were complicated on their end right now, and the timing mattered. Darius read the 4 words twice. He turned the notepad back toward his mother without saying anything. She didn't say it like a woman who has options, Claudette continued. She said it like a woman watching a clock. Darius sat back in his chair. He let the information settle, the way he always did, not rushing to a reaction, just letting the full weight of it find its level. They needed the money. That was the truth underneath all of it. The entitlement, the framing about fairness, the call to his mother. None of it was coming from a position of strength. It was coming from a venture that was already losing ground, and a man whose professional future was considerably more fragile than he knew anyone could see. They were not pressing him from the top. They were pressing him from the bottom, hoping he wouldn't notice the difference. He pulled out his phone and sent Angela a short message. "Call me when you can. Tonight, if possible." Angela called back in 12 minutes. "Slow it down," Darius told her. "Not enough to look like obstruction. Just enough to let the timeline work against them." There was a brief pause on Angela's end. Then, "Understood. I can find a few procedural reasons to extend the response window. Legitimately. It'll add 3 to 4 weeks minimum." "That's enough," Darius said. He hung up and set the phone face down on the table. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car moved slowly down the block. He finished his tea. When he stood to leave, Claudette walked him to the door the way she always had. Unhurried, no drama. She held the door open and looked at her son in the porch light the way only a mother looks at a man she raised. "She's nervous, baby," Claudette said. "Nervous people talk too much." The call from Thomas came on a Wednesday afternoon, just past 3. Darius was in his truck, coming back from a site walk on the 4th property, a mixed-use building in Hampton that was 2 months from completion. He had paint samples in a bag on the passenger seat and dried concrete dust on his boots. "You need to come to my office," Thomas said. No joke in his voice, no warm-up. "I found something in the permit records." "How soon?" "Now would be good." Thomas ran his operation out of a converted warehouse space in the Remington neighborhood. Exposed brick, rolling shelves loaded with binders, blueprints pinned to boards across one full wall. It looked like organized chaos to anyone who didn't know him. To anyone who did, it was a filing system of almost frightening precision. Thomas was already standing when Darius walked in, one hand resting on a thick stack of documents spread across the center table, a highlighter tucked behind his ear. "Sit down," Thomas said. Darius sat. "So Yvette's legal team has been pushing this argument that she contributed to the investment property," Thomas said, sliding a permit copy across the table. "Because her name shows up here. Secondary party on this construction permit from 2014. You remember filing this?" Darius looked at the document. "Financing requirement. The lender wanted a second signature to simplify the draw process. It was administrative." "Right. Completely administrative." Thomas nodded. "Her attorneys don't care. They're using it to argue material contribution. But that's not what I called you about." He pulled a second document from the stack and placed it beside the first. "Because when I started pulling the full permit history, I went back further, and I found this." The second document was a lease reassignment form, commercial property, dated about 2 years into their marriage. Darius's name was on it. Yvette's name had a single line drawn through it, initialed and notarized. Darius picked it up and read it once. Then he read it again. "She pulled her name off a commercial lease," Tomas said, watching him. "A lease you two co-held early in the marriage, and when she did that, the tax liability for the remaining term transferred entirely to you. We're talking about 3 years of liability you carried that should have been split. I didn't know about this. I know you didn't." Tomas crossed his arms. "Because it wasn't disclosed to you. It wasn't discussed. It was just done, quietly, by an attorney." Darius set the document down. "Which attorney?" Tomas slid a third page across. It was a printout, a firm profile, a professional connection pulled from a licensing database. The attorney who handled the reassignment worked at a firm called Hargrove and Sills, Tomas said. That firm had a formal professional services relationship with an individual named Perry Walsh, back when Perry was still doing advisory work through a brokerage affiliate before he went independent. He paused to let that land. "This was 12 years ago, Darius." The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Except it wasn't the kitchen. It was Tomas's office, and the only sound was the low vibration of the HVAC and the distant noise of a forklift somewhere outside on the street. 12 years ago. Darius did the math without moving. He and Yvette had married 16 years back. The lease reassignment was 14 years ago, 2 years in. Perry Walsh's professional connection to the firm that executed it went back 12 years at minimum, which meant the connection between Perry and Yvette predated the email chain from the boxes by years. Not months, years. "The emails I found," Darius said. "The ones from 14 months before she filed. Those weren't the beginning," Tomas said. "Those were somewhere in the middle." Darius looked at the 3 documents laid side by side on the table. A construction permit with Yvette's name on it as supposed proof of her contribution. A lease reassignment that quietly handed him a tax burden she walked away from. A firm profile connecting the attorney who executed it to a man Darius had been told was a recent development in his wife's life. The full shape of it came together the way a structural failure analysis comes together. Not all at once, but in sequence, each point connecting to the next, until the load-bearing lie becomes visible. This was not a woman who grew unhappy and found someone new. This was a woman who had been building a door for years before she used it, moving money, shedding liabilities, maintaining a connection she never disclosed, all while Darius worked 12 and 14-hour days, laying the very foundation she had always planned to step away from. He gathered the documents into a neat stack and stood up. "Make me a copy of everything," he said. "Already done." Tomas pulled a manila envelope from beneath the table and held it out. "Angela gets the original set." Darius took the envelope. He held it at his side, his grip easy, his face unreadable. "You all right?" Tomas asked. "Yes," Darius said. And he meant it. He drove to his mother's house without deciding to. The truck seemed to know the way without being asked. He sat in the cab outside for a few minutes with the engine off, the envelope on the passenger seat where the paint samples had been. The streetlights were just beginning to come on. A neighbor's dog barked once from somewhere down the block and then went quiet. He read through Tomas's full summary one more time in the low evening light. Every page, every date. He did not rush. He did not skip anything. Then he put the papers back in the envelope, tucked it under his arm, and went inside. Claudette had made pot roast. She didn't ask what he was doing there. She just set another place at the table the way she always had, the way that said, "You don't need a reason to come home." They ate and talked about small things. The neighbor 2 doors down, who had finally repainted his shutters after 5 years of Claudette suggesting it with her eyes. A former student of hers who had just been accepted to Howard. The fact that the pot roast needed another 10 minutes. A verdict Claudette delivered about her own cooking with complete objectivity. Darius ate. He listened. He asked the right questions. But Claudette was watching him the way she watched things, quietly, from the side, the way a teacher watches a student who is holding something back. She had been doing it since he was 9 years old. He had never once fooled her. She didn't ask. She let him have the meal in peace. After the dishes were cleared, Darius sat with his coffee and turned the cup slowly in his hands. The envelope was in his jacket, which hung over the back of his chair. Claudette sat across from him with her own cup, and the kitchen settled into the particular silence that meant everyone in it understood that something real was about to be said. Darius set down his coffee cup. "It's time," he said. The Baltimore family courthouse smelled the way it always did. Floor wax, recycled air, and the particular staleness of a building where difficult things happened on a schedule. Darius arrived at 7:45. The hearing wasn't until 9. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, shoes he had polished himself the night before. He carried nothing. Angela carried everything: a rolling case, a legal pad, an expandable file organized in a way only she fully understood. They took seats at the respondent's table, and Angela laid out her materials without a word. Darius sat with his hands folded on the table and looked at the empty bench. His breathing was even. His face was still. He had slept 6 hours and eaten breakfast. Yvette arrived at 8:20 with her attorney, a man named Garrett who had silver hair and the practiced confidence of someone who billed $400 an hour and wanted you to feel it. Yvette wore a dark blazer and had her hair pulled back neatly. She looked composed. She did not look at Darius when she entered. Perry came in 2 minutes behind them and took a seat in the public gallery, 3rd row, center. He crossed one leg over the other and rested his arm along the back of the bench like a man settling in to watch something he expected to enjoy. Darius noted all of it without turning his head. The judge was a compact man named Holloway, with reading glasses he kept removing and replacing. He entered at 9 sharp, settled himself, and reviewed the case summary for about 30 seconds before nodding at Garrett to begin. Garrett stood and built his argument the way a man lays bricks, one flat layer at a time, nothing fancy, all weight. The investment property Darius retained had been a marital asset at the time of the divorce. Its appreciation since the settlement was substantial. He named the figure with deliberate clarity. Yvette's name appeared on a construction permit dated during the marriage, evidence of documented contribution. The settlement language, Garrett argued, had not adequately addressed the property's long-term value. His client was not asking for more than she was owed. She was simply asking the court to correct what the original settlement had left unresolved. It was a clean argument, polished, the kind that worked well when no one looked too far behind it. The judge wrote something on his notepad. Then he looked at Angela. Angela stood. She did not start with the evidence. She started with the settlement document itself, opened it to the relevant page, placed a copy in front of the judge, and pointed to the specific language Yvette's own attorney had used to carve the investment property out of the marital estate at the time of the divorce. The wording was precise, unambiguous. She let the judge read it himself before she said anything further. Then she moved to the document. The bank records came first. 41 transfers over 8 months, each one small enough to avoid automatic flags, each one moving money out of a joint account and into a private account in Yvette's name alone. The timestamps were printed in a clean column down the right side of each page. The total was highlighted in yellow at the bottom of the final sheet: $34,000. Angela placed the email chain beside the bank records. These emails, she said, predate the divorce filing by 14 months. They establish that the asset transfers were not spontaneous. They were coordinated, and they were coordinated with the assistance of Mr. Perry Walsh, who was, at that time, serving as the petitioner's financial advisor. She let a beat pass. That dual role, financial advisor and romantic partner, represents a direct breach of fiduciary obligation. Mr. Walsh used his professional access to advise a client on restructuring marital assets in her favor, while concealing a personal relationship with her. The court should also be aware that a formal regulatory complaint regarding similar conduct in a prior advisory relationship has been submitted to Mr. Walsh's licensing board and is currently under active review. Garrett shifted in his seat. Angela set down a fourth document, the commercial lease reassignment from early in the marriage. She walked the judge through it with the same quiet efficiency. Yvette's name removed, the tax liability transferred to Darius without disclosure, the attorney who executed it, and that attorney's professional connection to Perry Walsh's former firm. The timeline, Your Honor, shows that this connection between Mr. Walsh and the petitioner extends across nearly the full length of the marriage. She paused. This was not a post-divorce relationship. The exit the petitioner executed was planned, financially, legally, and personally, over a period of years. During that same period, my client was carrying liabilities he was never told about, and building assets he was never meant to keep. She formally requested dismissal with prejudice and asked the court to include the documented financial misconduct in the written record for further review. Then she sat down. Judge Holloway was quiet for a moment. He looked at the bank records. He removed his glasses and held them in one hand, turning them slowly. Then he put them back on and looked at Garrett. "Counsel." His voice was level. "The transfer documentation your opposing counsel has submitted. $34,000, coordinated prior to the filing." He tapped the page once with one finger. "Does your client have a response to this?" Garrett straightened. "Your Honor, if I could have a brief moment to confer with my client?" "You may. I'd like to request a short recess." The judge nodded. 10 minutes. The courtroom stirred, chairs scraping, whispered conversations beginning, the rustle of papers being gathered. In the third row of the gallery, Perry Walsh did not move. The hallway outside courtroom 4 was long and narrow, with fluorescent lights that buzzed just below the threshold of hearing. The floor was pale linoleum. A water fountain sat against one wall. A wooden bench ran the length of the opposite side. Darius stood near the window at the far end. He had not gone to confer with Angela. She was at the table just inside the courtroom doors, head down, pen moving across her legal pad. He had told her he needed air. She had nodded without looking up. He stood with his hands in his pockets and watched a pigeon navigate the ledge outside the window. He was not thinking about anything in particular. That was its own kind of discipline. He heard her footsteps before he saw her. Yvette came down the hallway alone. No Garrett, no Perry. Her heels were quiet on the linoleum, but he knew the rhythm of the way she walked. He had known it for 20 years. She stopped a few feet away. Up close, the composure he had watched her maintain all morning had fine cracks running through it. Her eyes were careful. Her jaw was set in the particular way it always had been when she was working hard not to show something. "Darius." He turned from the window and looked at her. She exhaled slowly. "I didn't think it would go this far." He said nothing. "Perry pushed this." She shook her head slightly. "The legal action. The whole thing. I went along with it because he said it was straightforward. He said you would just settle." A short pause. "I should have known better." She looked down at her hands and then back up at him. "I made mistakes. I know that. I made a lot of them." He let her finish. He waited a beat longer to make sure she had. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet. No edge to it. No heat. Just words, placed where they needed to be. "You didn't make mistakes, Yvette." He held her eyes. "You made choices. For years. While I was home building something you decided wasn't worth waiting for, you made choices. You moved money. You planned. And the whole time, you let me believe in something that wasn't real." He paused. "That's not a mistake. A mistake is something that happens. What you did took time." She opened her mouth slightly, then closed it. I'm not angry anymore, he said. I want you to understand that. I'm past it. He tilted his head just slightly, like a man making sure a measurement is level. But I need you to hear this clearly before we go back in there. I was always this man, Yvette. The man you're looking at right now. I was always him. You just decided you didn't have the patience to find out. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not guilt exactly, but the closest thing to it she was capable of in that hallway on that morning. You wanted your share, he said. This is it. He turned and walked back toward the courtroom doors. He did not look back. Yvette stayed where she was. The hallway was quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Outside the window, the pigeon was gone. She stood with her arms at her sides and looked at the space Darius had just left. A woman walking past with a file folder glanced at her briefly and kept moving. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. 2 minutes passed, maybe 3. Then Garrett appeared at the end of the hallway, moving quickly, looking for her. He spotted her and closed the distance with the urgent stride of a man who had things to say before the clock ran out. Yvette. His voice was low and pointed. I need you back inside. We need to go over. I know, she said. Her voice came out flat, not broken, just emptied of the performance it had been carrying all morning. She let Garrett steer her back toward the courtroom. Both parties returned to their tables at the same time, from opposite doors. Darius sat down, folded his hands, and looked at the empty bench. Angela glanced at him once, a brief, assessing look, and then returned to her legal pad without comment. Yvette sat down beside Garrett and straightened a piece of paper in front of her that did not need straightening. Perry, in the gallery, recrossed his legs. The door behind the bench opened, and Judge Holloway entered with the particular economy of movement that courtrooms required. Everyone stood. He sat, they sat, and he settled his glasses on his face and looked out at the room with the expression of a man who had heard the recess through a thin wall and drawn conclusions accordingly. He called the courtroom to order. We're back on the record, he said. He folded his hands over the bench. I've reviewed the materials presented this morning, and I've considered the arguments from both parties. He paused. I'm prepared to issue a written ruling within the week. Angela called on a Tuesday morning. Darius was in his truck, parked outside a property in Fells Point, coffee going cold in the cup holder. He saw her name on the screen and picked up on the second ring. The ruling arrived, she said. No greeting, no preamble. That was Angela. He said, Read it to me. He heard paper move. Then her voice, flat and precise, the petitioner's claim for equitable distribution of post-dissolution appreciation is dismissed with prejudice. The court finds no legal basis for the relief sought. Additionally, the court notes that documentary evidence submitted during these proceedings raises material questions of financial misconduct, warranting review by the appropriate authorities. This court directs that a copy of the relevant exhibits be forwarded to the Maryland office of the Attorney General. She stopped reading. Darius looked out through the windshield at the brick face of the building across the street. A woman walked past with a dog. A delivery truck idled at the corner. Dismissed with prejudice, he said. Dismissed with prejudice, Angela confirmed. She can't bring this again. Not this claim. Not in this court. He nodded, though she couldn't see it. Thank you, Angela. Don't thank me yet, she said. I've got a regulatory complaint to file. She filed it the next morning. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They came in sequence, the way structural failures do. One load-bearing point giving way, then another, then the whole thing finding its new and terrible level. The Maryland Financial Licensing Board received Angela's formal complaint against Perry Walsh on a Wednesday. By Friday, given the prior disciplinary record already sitting in his file, they had opened a formal investigation. His license was suspended pending review. His firm, a mid-size advisory group with offices in Bethesda and Annapolis, placed him on administrative leave the same afternoon the suspension posted to the public record. The public record was the part that moved fast. 3 of Perry's larger clients submitted transfer requests within the first 10 days. 2 more followed the week after. These were not impulsive decisions. They were the decisions of people who had been watching a man manage their money and now had a documented reason to stop. The prior complaint, once buried, was now part of the same public record as the new one. Side by side, they told a story that no smooth phone call could untell. Tomas sent Darius a single text when the suspension posted. Saw it. Good. Darius read it, set his phone down, and went back to reviewing permits. The real estate venture Perry and Yvette had been counting on. The one Yvette had accidentally disclosed to Claudette, the one they needed Darius's settlement money to keep breathing, did not survive the spring. Without the capital they had been certain was coming, the project couldn't service its debt or satisfy its investors. The partners called a meeting in March. By April, the entity was dissolved. The investors had already begun withdrawing before the formal vote. When money gets nervous, it moves quickly, and it doesn't say goodbye. Yvette had left her HR position 18 months earlier to manage Perry's business interests full-time. It had seemed like momentum at the time, a new chapter, a better life, the kind of visible forward motion she had always wanted. Now, Perry was under formal investigation. His income was essentially frozen, and the business she had stepped into was gone. She was not destitute, but she was exposed in a way she had never planned to be. The row house went on the market in May. The listing sat for 6 weeks. When it finally sold, the number came in slightly under the mortgage balance. Yvette covered the gap. Darius learned this the way he learned most things now, through Angela, briefly, as a footnote to something else. He did not feel satisfaction exactly. What he felt was closer to recognition. A thing had always been true, and now it was simply visible. 14 months after the hearing, Darius was on the quiet tide. The boat was moored at a private marina outside Savannah, in a slip that caught the afternoon light in a way that made the water look like hammered copper. His 5th development project had broken ground 3 weeks prior. He had been approached about a 6th. Tomas was below deck. The sound of something sizzling on the grill rose up through the companionway, accompanied by Tomas's running argument with a piece of fish that had apparently offended him personally. Claudette sat in a deck chair near the stern with a novel open in her lap, and the silk scarf Darius had brought her from Lisbon tied loosely around her shoulders. She was not reading. She was watching the water with the unhurried expression of a woman who had earned the right to simply sit. Angela's email had arrived that morning. 2 lines. Perry Walsh. License revoked. Permanent. Thought you'd want to know. Darius had read it once. He had set his phone face down on the rail. He had not picked it up since. Now he stood at the bow with a glass of bourbon and looked out at the open water, the wide, indifferent, beautiful sprawl of it, and he thought about the word Yvette had used on the phone, that share, the way she had said it, possessive, assured, like a door she already held the key to. He looked at the boat beneath his feet. He looked at his mother in her chair and heard his best friend cursing cheerfully at a grill below him. He looked at all of it. She'd been right about one thing. He was going somewhere. She just hadn't been patient enough to find out where. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.